Okay, so this excerpt is from chapter 1, titled Heist on the Valiant. The cargo hold of the Valiant was in a state of complete chaos. Automatic weapons fire rang out as bullets bounced around the room. Several Pinkertons and the boss unit, a two-person behemoth with a pilot and an engineer, were on one side. The pilot controlled the mech, including movement and firing the weapons. Simultaneously, the engineer kept the steam pressure operating the complex systems under control and the ammunition flowing into the guns. Pipes, gears, and hoses moved the mech, acting like a human frame with arms and legs, but under mechanical operation. Across the way, Kiki and her team were pinned down behind cargo crates and stacks of luggage by the constant fire. A hailstorm of bullets rang out, tearing through everything, with no regard for personal or property damage. This situation was why the airship lines had insurance, especially for pirates. Kiki braced herself against the luggage rack, a Colt revolver in one hand and her katana in the other. She looked across from her, watching Nox and Dash bracing themselves against the onslaught of firepower. "We can't stay here forever, Fraulein Kiki," Nox shouted over the gunfire. "Those verdammte Maschinen are indestructible." "Except behind the knees," Kiki said. "That's why all their firepower is forward-facing." "Ah, then leave it to me, Signora," Dash countered. "Nox, I need a distraction." Nox knew what Dash wanted. He stood straight up and opened fire, blasting back at the boss. Although it barely scratched the surface of the machine, it did cause the Pinkertons to scatter. Nox took the brunt of the gunfire in his armored chest plate, while Dash quickly went to work. He peeked around Nox's massive legs, using him for protection while setting up his shot. If there was one thing Dash was good at, it was a trick ricochet shot. He loved the new Western motion pictures, and thought of himself as a cowboy trying to outsmart the villain to save a damsel in distress. After a few good looks, he squared up and aimed with his Colt revolver. It took seconds for him to fire, bouncing the bullet off some piping before it hit the boss right behind its right knee. The shot was near perfect, breaking a hydraulic line that started spraying fluid. The slippery mess caused the Pinkertons hiding behind the monstrosity to slip and fall to the ground, leaving them open to Nox's barrage as he adjusted his firing to cut them down, one by one. The boss unit went down to one knee, forced to use its gun arm to prop itself up. It appeared to be over until the pilot raised its other arm to fire. This one had a different weapon from the Gatling gun, a 7.5-centimeter howitzer cannon. ERP hadn't designed it for use in an enclosed space like the cargo hold, but the boss pilot didn't care. "Amadeo!" Kiki swore in Japanese when she saw the robotic soldier aiming the cannon at them. She froze in fear and thought it was the end of everything. Until he arrived. Corsair jumped over the rail from the top catwalk, sword in hand, and spiraled toward the boss unit. His blade plunged through the roof of the mech, piercing the cockpit. He flipped a switch inside his basket hilt and revealed the real power of his sword. The gears on the basket hilt spun to reform into a new configuration. The pommel's stone glowed when it was complete, a piece of Uriel activating. The sword exploded with an immense electrical discharge, sending it downward into the boss unit until every electrical system shorted out, killing the pilot and engineer. His rubber-soled boots saved Corsair from electrocution. One of the Pinkertons aimed at Corsair, but he was stopped by Mooncrow up on the catwalk. His Winchester blew the gun right out of the Pinkerton's hand. He dropped to his knees, clenching his hand in pain as his gasping wound bled out. Kiki jumped out and laid her sword across his throat, ready to silence him. "Wait a minute, Kiki," Corsair commanded, stopping her in her tracks. "We need him alive." He pulled out his sword and jumped off the boss unit, careful not to slip on the mech's hydraulic fluid. Corsair walked up to the whimpering prisoner, adding his blade to Kiki's. The Pinkerton, grasping tightly at the wound on his hand, looked closely at the two edges pointing at him. "Now then, unless you want to end up like your friends, you'd better start talking," Corsair insisted. "Where is the piece of Uriel?" He trembled violently, uncertainty growing in his eyes. He decided on the latter. "It's inside the unit," he whimpered, nodding toward the inactive mech. Corsair pulled out a handkerchief from his breast pocket and handed it to the injured Pinkerton. "You'd better wrap that tightly. You might bleed to death," he said. He quickly grabbed the cloth and wrapped it around his injured hand to stem the bleeding. Corsair walked over to the boss to see if what the Pinkerton had said was true. "Do you believe him?" Kiki asked. Corsair flipped his sword around, pointing the blade to the floor, grasping the hilt. He placed his thumb on the pommel, flipping another switch as the gears on his basket hilt started moving again. "We'll soon find out," he cautioned as the gears finished their alignment. The gem emitted a soft light over the mechanical soldier. It moved up and down in a straight line, slowly examining the structure. Finally, it stopped below the cockpit and paused, as if the same puzzle pieces found each other. "It's nice to see Signor Tesla's device at work. So meraviglioso," Dash complimented, blowing a kiss with his fingers. Corsair thought about what Dash had said before he sheathed his sword. "Cut her open, Kiki," he ordered before lowering his goggles and adjusting the lenses. Kiki stepped forward. Like Corsair's cutlass, her katana had a secret all its own. She twisted the outer ring of the guard until it clicked, popping open 2 small valves on either side of the blade collar. A spray of blue flame immediately spread up the sword, sheathing it in a super-hot corona. Kiki plunged the blade into the cockpit, carving a hole as if her sword was a superheated acetylene torch. Corsair watched intently as he casually tapped the side of his goggles to a melodic beat. "Not to worry, boys. We'll have this sardine can open shortly," Kiki said confidently. Once she finished, the steel plate fell open, rattling off the deck. Steam rushed out, along with a powerful smell of charred flesh. The smell of death never bothered Corsair. In all his years of pirating, he'd become used to it. Corsair reached under the pilot's seat and pulled out a locked strongbox. The steel container was the size of a shoebox, with a hinged lid and a large padlock securing it shut. He carefully set it down on top of a crate, trying to keep it level. "Dash, open it," he ordered his best lockpick. Dash winked at him. Corsair knew he always had the right tool for the job. Dash pulled out what appeared to be a cigarette from his shirt pocket and put it in his mouth before striking a match nonchalantly off Knox's armor. He lit the cigarette, but didn't inhale like one usually would. Instead, he let it burn slowly before placing the lit end into the locking mechanism. Within seconds, the small pop of an explosion burst open the lock. "It is easy for a genio like me," he boasted before Knox pulled him back so Corsair could get into the box. He pulled the lock off and opened the lid slowly, as a soft blue glow radiated from inside. It was something truly amazing to see, even for Corsair. Inside a glass cylinder was the largest piece of Uriel's comet that he'd ever laid his eyes on before. It was suspended inside the glass tube by a magnetic field generated between metal caps sealing both ends of the tube. He picked up the glass container in his hand and looked at the glowing meteorite in awe. Everyone else was equally amazed by the size of the mineral. "Lieber Gott, that's got to be 3 to 5 kilograms, Knox marveled. "That's enough power to run the Galeru for 1,000 years, Kiki blurted out. "It's amazing." "It's bait," Corsair plainly stated, "and we've walked into a trap." He carefully put the fragment back into the box and closed the lid, tucking it under his arm. "We need to get back to the ship. Now!" Before they could move, they heard the sound of footsteps rushing into the upper catwalks. When they looked up, the ship's security quickly filed into position, with some of the Pinkertons mixed into their ranks. They surrounded them from above, aiming their weapons down at the pirates, ready to fire. Everyone looked up at more than 50 guns aimed at them. They couldn't believe the number of armed security personnel standing up there, more than double the standard complement for a Valiant Zeppelin. "Where did all these goons come from?" Kiki asked. "They were acting as passengers to confuse our scans with the RMF," Corsair said. This whole setup was a trap, specifically for us. A single person clapping their hands echoed in the cargo hold. Corsair watched and waited to see who led the applause, and then he recognized him immediately. Clapping his hands with a sarcastic smirk to match his glee, an unusual-looking man strolled out onto the catwalk. His bright red hair and stark white skin earned him the nickname the Red Ghost, attributed to his appearance and brutal methods of getting things done. He had worked his way up through ERP, keeping workers in lines, breaking up strikes, and bullying corporate bosses to accept ERP's demands during tense negotiations. He wore a bowler hat on his head, a fine suit befitting a man of his stature, and carried a shillelagh under his arm. His name was Daniel McTavish, director of ERP security. "Well done, boyo, but you figured it out a little too late," he jeered. "I guess you're not as smart as people say you are, eh, Corsair?" "Oh, I don't know, Duke. The smart thing wouldn't have been letting me get to Creusi, steal his thinking machine, or taking down a boss unit." Corsair sassed back, calling McTavish by another nickname he despised. He was sometimes called Duke because of his penchant for fighting, always wanting to duke it out with others. He hated the nickname because it reminded him of his lowly past and many failures. "This little venture of yours will cost ERP a lot of money. And for what, Duke?" "For that," McTavish said, pointing at Corsair's blade. "Your sword." Corsair couldn't help but laugh. "What? With all the brains working for Edison, he still can't figure out how to accurately track down pieces of Uriel? Really? Tesla worked that problem out a long time ago." McTavish hated seeing his boss insulted by a common thief like Corsair. He held Edison in the highest regard and with nothing but respect, and this banter of Corsair's upset him. Still, McTavish smiled, thinking he had the upper hand. "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that, since I'll be prying that sword from your dead hands," he said as the men cocked their weapons to open fire. In an instant, Dash pulled a bomb out of his pack and slapped it on the box containing Uriel's fragment, holding the plunger in his hand. McTavish's smile shifted to a frown as he held up his hands, stopping the security forces from firing down into the hold. See, Duke, you're a lot smarter than you look," Corsair said, countering his insult. "And by the way, Dash here's got a hair-trigger finger, so don't try anything stupid. Now, I figure that this bomb, combined with the fragment's power, will blow this entire ship to pieces. That includes Creusi, the passengers, these men, and your sorry ass." "You'll be dead too, mate. Don't forget that," McTavish snapped back. "I'm not worried about my death, Duke. Every day I meet more and more like me, ready to fight back against ERP and any other corporation willing to kill for its profit," Corsair said. "The day of the corporate ruler is over. The day of the freedom fighter is coming anew, and there's nothing a bully like you can do to stop it." McTavish had thought he had the upper hand over these pirates. Instead, he had to stand there and endure insults and bravado by these brigands. His blood boiled, but he would be more concerned if his intricate plan fell apart. "I tell you what, me boyo, why don't we settle this man to man?" McTavish countered. "If you beat me, you get to walk out of here with that piece of Uriel and your lives. If I win, you surrender. Pure and simple." Corsair had the face of a champion poker player as he stared McTavish down. He thought for a moment, not saying a word, as if he were considering the offer. "Come on, boy. What do you say?" McTavish shouted down as his anger got the best of him. "You either fight me or blow us all to hell. Which is it?" "Plan C," Corsair retorted. His answer confused McTavish. The head of security started laughing, thinking the pirate had gone mad. "What the hell is Plan C?" he asked, as if on cue, the answer came down through the ceiling. A single drop tube broke through the cargo hold. They didn't typically extend down this far, and it had to pierce the superstructure and rip through one of the hydrogen bladders. Moreover, by forcing the drop tube this far down into the Valiant, there was no way to seal the opening behind it as helium poured into the cargo hold. The downdraft choked out the men on the catwalk, as McTavish could only stand there and watch the pirates squeeze into their boarding elevator. Knox had to leave his Gatling gun and ammunition backpack behind to make enough room for all 5 of them. Kiki was the most uncomfortable, getting in tight quarters with 4 men. The Irish bully was so enraged that he reached into his coat and drew his own Colt M1900. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Corsair warned before he could squeeze the trigger. "There's enough hydrogen in here to blow us all to bits. Now, I know you don't want to kill Edison's best friend, do you?" McTavish thought about it before he holstered his weapon. "Next time, Corsair. Your arse is mine." Corsair smiled and sarcastically saluted as he got into the drop tube before the door shut. As quickly as it came in, the drop tube extracted through the drop tube retracted through the Zeppelin and returned to the Galeru. In an instant, the pirates were gone. McTavish stood there, boiling as he stared at the empty ceiling. "Sir!" one of the Pinkertons yelled at him. "We have to evacuate and seal the cargo hold, or the hydrogen will suffocate us." McTavish acquiesced before he spun on his heels and stormed out of the room. He had lost this battle, but he would win the war.